So now I can go ahead and I can begin to show you more powerful effectors. So I will redo a grid cloner from scratch. Okay, so let's create one. Again, I can play with the values here, and I can go in the animate tab, and I won't choose the different options here because you have seen just before how it works. So I will, with this cloner selected, I will click on the delay effector. Okay, the delay effector. As you can see, this is the same name than in Cinema 4D, and in Cinema 4D it will override your transformations of your clones with a nice spring effect. This one is a little bit different because it won't overwrite what other effectors do. It relies entirely on keyframes. And the cool thing is, moreover, this delay effector will create a nice springy animation for each clone one by one with a sequential offset, which is really cool. So let me show you how it works. So I have this nice hertz cloned in a grid area. Okay, I will click on my cloner, click on the delay effector, and if you press play, you will see this nice motion. And by default, as you can see, the clones will travel towards the bottom of the screen with a nice offset between each clone and with a nice springy motion. Okay, this is pretty cool. So by default, it will create two keyframes. So if you type U, you will see these two keyframes here, and the first keyframe will appear at the current time when you click on the delay effector. So if I undo my delay effector, so I have undone it, so as you can see there weren't any effectors here. So if I am here at 2 seconds, let's say, for example, I click on my cloner, I can do delay, and as you can see my keyframes are here. So it means that before there weren't any motions applied to my clones, and just after the first keyframe the clones begin to move. Okay, so it's pretty nice. So how it works? By default, the motion is created by an animation slider from 0 to 100. Okay, so from 0 for the first keyframe to 100 for the second keyframe. So it is the animation value for one clone, and the springy motion, that is basically a secondary motion, is just computed for you on top of it. So it's really cool, and the offset between each clone in the time is done by the effector delay as well. So I will show you now the different settings of the effector delay. As you can see, you can still play with the parameters, just like in the plane effector. You have already seen it. So I can go in the transform, I can not play with the position Y, which is a default value. As you can see, I have 0 it out, so there weren't any motion. But if I play, let's say, with the rotation here and the scale, okay, something like this, now I have this nice motion. Just to see it clearly, I will add a stroke just by going in the cloner, and since it's a basic text layer, I can go in the character panel and go in there and set the stroke width. I will play with it to add a thin stroke, and don't try to add a color from here for the fill or the stroke, because you have to remind that all the color for the fill and the stroke are defined here in the Moglyph transform group. So the fill color is this one, and the stroke color is this one. Okay, so this is where you find the color for the fill and the stroke, but you haven't any thickness property here. You have to define it by default here in the character panel, even if you can add some thickness settings just by adding a plain effector, for example. So this is it. I have a nice grid of that, and now if I press play, okay, all my glyphs turn by 90 degrees. That is the parameters that I have defined in my rotation Z here, and I have scaled them up 100% on X and Y. This is why the clones become bigger. Okay, and you can play with the color as well. So if I go to the style group, I can uncheck, for example, the colors from cloner. I can choose, for example, a red. Okay, and as you can see, it will colorize your hertz in red. It's really cool, and I will recheck it. I can play with the opacity, which is pretty cool. I can go in the brightness. I can choose the stroke. I can increase the stroke thickness. Okay, like this, for example. I can type in some negative values if I want to, let's say, to remove completely the initial stroke width from here. If I want to remove it, I have 12 here. I can type in -12, and now, okay, there isn't any strokes anymore. Okay, which is pretty cool. So I will zero it out. And you can play with blur, for instance, which could be fun too. Okay, something like this, to make some nice kind of clouds, for example. So it's really nice. And play with other values. So this is pretty easy to understand. So you have an animation from 0 in animation to 100. So where is in my effect this animation slider? Well, the effector delay has some different options than the plain effectors. So all the specific options for each effector will be found in the effector group. So for the effector delay, if I drill down here, you'll find the animation slider here. So this is where you'll animate your clones, and if I want to reverse my animation, I can simply add a new keyframe here at 100 and retype 0 here, and I have an in animation and an out animation as well. So if I press play, I have this. Okay, pretty cool. Okay, this is pretty nice. So yeah, this is it. There is a particular motion that you probably will want to achieve, and which is basic in motion, but which is a little bit more complicated to achieve with this delay effector. So I want to show you now. So I will delete this keyframe. I will stay with this keyframe here, and I can go in the parameters, go to transform. I do not want a rotation at all. I just want a motion where my hertz are popping up from 0 in size to this final size. So I want them to be this size in the final state, but in the initial state I do not want to have them visible. I want them to have a scale at 0. So this is not that easy to create, because you can't multiply a size of 0. So if you want to do this, I want to show you how to do it. So you have your effector delay, and before having your size animation with the effector delay, you have first to go in the cloner, not the object, but in the transform of the cloner, and you have to play with the scale X and scale Y, and now you have to decrease as much as possible your value. So I will type in 1% and 1% in scale X and scale Y. So now you don't see your clones anymore. In fact, they are there, but they are way too small to see them correctly. Okay, so now that my scale X and scale Y in the transform is set to 1%, in my effector delay, if I go to the parameters, transform, if I play with the scale X and scale Y, the value that I want to set here must be the inverse of what I decrease in the scale here. So if I removed 2 0 to have 100, not 100 but 1, I will add 2 0 here. So instead of 100%, I will type 10,000%, and I will do it for the scale Y as well. So if I just keep that in mind, for such an animation with a delay effector, you have to scale in the transform of the cloner at 1%, and in the effector delay you have to scale at 10,000% for X and Y as well. So now if I press play, look at what happens. So it's pretty cool. So now I have resized all my clones one by one to make them appear in a nice organic sequential delay motion. Okay, let's think of it like a value at time plus an ease and with spring effect, for example. So it's really cool. Okay, pretty nice. This is what the effector delay does. There is one more thing that I want to show you in the effector delay, the group effector. I have shown you what the animation slider stands for, and you have like in the plane effector and like any other effector, a strength that you can set to less than 100. So if I stop my animation here, for example, if I decrease the strength not to 100 but 50, sorry, I have 50% less the animation. And if I zero it out, I do not have any animation at all, and I retrieve only my little clones from that are sized by the 1% value here. Okay, so this is the threads. It's really easy to understand. So another cool thing that you can play with in the effector delay is the group of settings that will define the elastic effect here. So the elasticity, in most cases, you won't have to touch to this. By default, you will prefer to stay at one as a value. But if I type 0 here, I haven't any spring elastic motion at it at all. So if I press play, as you can see, this is just a sequential animation without any springy elastic bounce effect. So 0 means that, but I prefer to let it to 1 to be able to play with the other settings of the elasticity. So this is it for the elasticity. The next settings is called springs per second. So if I have 2, it will give me this default animation, which is pretty nice. But if I add more springs, I will have a more nervous animation. As you can see, this is way more nervous, okay, which can be more fun or more cartoonish, for example. And if I want something more smoother and more subtle, I can decrease the value. So if I have 1 spring per second, I have something way much nicer for me, okay? But the default value of 2 is pretty nice for me, okay? The second one is called the damping effect. So by default, I set up this value to 3, and if I decrease this value, let's say 1, I will have a near continuous bouncy animation. So if I do this, as you can see, the time will be way longer to stop the animation, okay? So this is why the damping is important. So if I want to have a really short animation but have some springs too, I can increase the damping to, let's say, 4, for example. And as you can see, I have a little bounce, which is nice, but the animation stays really short. And I can even increase it way more, let's say 2 springs per second and 8 in damping, for example. And as you can see, you have this nice back motion, which is pretty cool. Okay, and the maximum value is 100 for the damping, and the maximum value for the springs is 100 as well. So by default, this is 2 for springs per second and 3, I think, for the damping. And this is it for the nice elastic motion. And there is another important settings, which is called offset, that defines the time offset between each clone animation. So by default, this is 2. If I increase it at 10, for example, as you can see, each clone is way animated with a way more important time gap between them, okay? So there is 10 frames between each hurt here. I can add 25, so now I have 1 second for each hurt, which is pretty long, but it can be definitely useful for some animations. And conversely, if you have, so by default this is 2, I think, so if you have 0.5, you have a way faster transition from the first to the latest. Okay, pretty cool. So this is really nice. This is an effector that I use a lot. So keep that in mind, it's really important, and it works with keyframes. So, oh yes, this is there is a last option that I haven't shown yet. This is the bounce option. So I will redo my 2 value by default at the offset. I will increase a bit the number of springs per second, decrease the damping to have something more visible, and I will let's say rescale it to 100 and rescale it to 0. I do not want a scale animation, I want just okay, a rising animation with the position Y, and as you can see, by default you have a nice motion here with a nice elastic position. But if you want to give an illusion that the hertz will bounce against the border, the top border of the composition, you can do it. So I will go here, I will place my hertz, my top hertz here. And if you click on bounce, so let's review latest time. Let's review last time what it does without the bounce option. Okay, it's a nice spring motion, but with the bounce option, it will seem to collide with the border, which is pretty cool too. Okay, so it gives a nice impression. So it's really cool. It's a little bit like if you had applied the ease and with script with the bounce option, sorry. So it can definitely be a nice way to animate some cool things. So let me show you a brief example that shows you a more concrete example of the delay effector. So I will, for this, create Moglyph directional linear line cloner to the left. No, I want to center it. I do not want any stroke. I want to have this shape. Okay, I will reset the Moglyph cloner. So I haven't I do not have to drill down too much settings. So I go to the object, first step, transform. I can reduce the position X. I can have a bigger count, like something like this. I can decrease a little bit the position X, so the spacing. And if I rotate all my clone, they rotate from their center. I do not want that. I want to play with the transform X. Okay, so I will type in minus 100. So now, no, sorry, this is plus 100. Okay, so I want the anchor point to be at the bottom of the dominoes. So yes, we will do a little dominoes effect. Okay, so I will place the Y center, which is the anchor point of the shape 100, so it will be at the base of the shape. And I will undo the rotation, so zero it out. I will close this Moglyph cloner, and now all I have to do is to add a delay effector in the animate tab. So let's do it. I will go to the parameters, transform. I will undo the position Y. I will zero it out, and I will add a rotation Z. And I go to the style, and I do not, oh no, sorry, I do not want to touch the style. And if I go here, as you can see, if I go to the end of the animation, I can tweak the rotation to be able to have each domino on each domino, one on each other. Okay, so the value of 70 in my case is cool for me. Okay, so pretty nice. So if I press play, I have this nice motion. Okay, pretty nice, but a real domino won't act like this. I just have to play with the effector option, and I will check bounce. And now, as you can see, each domino will collide with each other, which is pretty cool. Okay, this is really nice, as you can see. Okay, we have something really interesting. So this is it for the delay effector. So there were great potential with this cool effector. So let's continue the overview of the animate tab. So the next one is called the formula effector. So I will recreate a Moglyph cloner from scratch. So let's go to generate. I will choose again a grid effector. I will choose basic geometry. Okay, so I will click on Moglyph grid. Again, I will reduce a bit the number of clones. And if I click on my cloner, if I go to the animate tab and click on the formula effector, as you can see, if I press play, I have an automatic animation that shows up. So it's a really useful effector, and to be honest, this is even my preferred one. So you do not want the black squared, but if I click on the transparency, you have your clones that are colorized in black and white. This is why you can't see some of the clones, and by default this is because the effector is colorized in the parameters style. It keeps your color by default, so if I have in the transform of the Moglyph cloner defined another color instead of the default light gray, I can, for instance, have a red one. So it keeps the base color of the Moglyph cloner, but in the formula, since the colors from cloner are checked by default, it will keep your red base, but the motion will show you some darker colors, because by default I have set it up to have the fill brightness to -100. By default this is this animation, but you can still type in 0, and now I have this motion with the initial color that hasn't been touched at all. So I do not want to show you anymore the color, so I will close this section, and I will choose a color that is more light in the transform Moglyph cloner. And now the motion is only done with the scale, okay, and in a nice wavy animation. So it does a scale animation because of the effector formula parameters transform that has been set up to scale 50% in X and Y. So if I zero it out, this is just like I didn't have added any effector at all. Okay, this is the default, the reset version of effector formula. Okay, so now I can, for example, play with the rotation, and now you have a nice motion with a wavy animation. You can play with the scale, so I can type -50, sorry, and now you have some smaller squares. I can play with the position, and it does exactly the same kind of animation that Cinema 4D does with the formula effectors. So you can play with the position X, the position Y, the position Z, and I can show you now how to deal with the position Z and the anchor point Z if you want to. So for any cloner setup that comes with Moglyph FX, whichever cloner setup you have chosen, you just can go in the cloner, drill down is the options here, the groups, go in the text, and near the text you can animate and choose enable per character 3D. And if I do this, you have all the properties that shows up. And now if I press play, there is nothing that happens because I didn't change anything here. But now if I play with the position Z, as you can see, now if I create a camera, okay, if I do it like this, if I do a half preview, okay, if I play with the style, I will have a darker color, just a little bit to add some depth. Okay, and now as you can see, I am fully in 3D, which is pretty nice. Okay, so this is only due to the position Z here. So what if you wanted to play with the rotation in 3D space? So it's a little bit more complicated since I didn't include any 3D rotation property in any effector. So as you can see, the only rotation that you have here is a rotation Z. But so if I click on this one, we will only see this kind of 2D rotation. But what if I want to turn them like this, like a nice swing motion on X or on Y-axis? Well, you can do it, but you have to drill down the text group manually. You have to go to the effector you want to apply a 3D property, to go here. And as you can see, as soon as I have added the enable per character 3D, the options that are in blue are the properties that aren't linked to my Moglyph effects. So for example, you have the X rotation, the Y rotation, and so if I want to have a nice swing motion, I can play with the X rotation, for example, and now I have a nice 3D motion with a nice formula effect, just like this. Okay, which is pretty nice. Just to let you know, I could have done it with the delay effector, so let's try it. So I will disable my effector formula here in the text group, so I can close this for the moment, and I will add a delay effector. Go here, and in my effector, in my group text group effector delay, I can add in the rotation, add a property and add a rotation. And as you can see, the needed 3D rotation appears here in blue. So now I can do a nice swing motion. Okay, I can go in the transform, 0 the position Y out, and in the Moglyph cloner transform group, I can have the Y center at minus 100, and now I have a nice spring motion. It's a little bit slow because there were a lot to compute. You have to keep in mind that all this is in real 3D, and it has a delay effect. Okay, so I can have, for instance, in the initial state in the Moglyph cloner, the rotation to, let's say, you have to go here, cloner transform, and type in minus 90 degree, and here you have to type 90 degree to have this nice motion. So now if I do this, sorry, I have to double the value because this is a delay effector. Sorry, it's a little bit complicated to explain it, but advanced users could do it in doubling the values here for the delay, only for the delay. This is specific to the delay effector. So I have a nice motion here. Okay, pretty cool. So I wanted to show you at least one time. Okay, so I will delete my delay effector. I will reactivate my effector formula, and I will disable the character 3D. So I have now a simple setup. Okay, with I will zero these values, and now I have only this nice motion, and I will have sorry, I will Okay, I have disabled the per character 3D. Like this, it's way faster to compute. Okay, and I can again play with the scale on X and Y. Okay, perfect. So I have this nice motion. So now that you have understood the different parameters for the effector formula, you can see what is in the effector tab here. So this one is really cool. This is one of my preferred effectors by far in my toolset, and because I have gathered and recreated 3 different formulas in the formula here. So I have a wave animation. This is this nice organic motion that behaves like a wave. You have an end selection, which is really cool, and a random direction. You will see it in a few seconds. So let's begin with the default one, which is the wave animation, which is based on the sinus function. So this is a wave motion, okay? So if I want to have a faster motion, I just have to play with the F, which is the frequency for the wave. So if I double the value here, so not 4 but 8, I should see a way faster motion, which is the case here. Okay, and you can see this wave travel from here to here, okay, from the bottom left to the top right corner. So if I do the inverse, so if I type minus 10, for example, the wave will go in the opposite side, like this. Okay, if I do this, you can see the animation do the opposite direction. Okay, pretty cool. So this is the way that you play with the speed, basically. Okay, at least for the wave animation, for this mode. And the n number here is the how to explain this? It's the wave length. Okay, so as you can see, the wave is pretty wide, pretty large, but you could see you could want a way smaller wavelength. So let me explain you with a bit more clones. So I will reset it by resetting it here. I have way more clones in a bigger grid. So now I have this nice motion. Okay, this is the formula that goes to here, from here to here, and the wave is pretty large, and this is due to this n number. Okay, so by default this is on 1, and for the wave animation it corresponds to this large motion. But if you want more how to say that, if you want a smaller, a thinner wavelength, you have to increase the n value. So if I type 2, you will have more clones affected by the formula. And if I type 0.5, it will do another motion here. So the wave will behave differently depending on the value you type on the n. Okay, so if I type let's say 0.1, you have a nice motion with a really smooth transition from here to here. Okay, but conversely, if I type 1.5, for example, I have this motion, and if I type 5, I will have a way smaller wavelength in this wave animation. It's pretty difficult to explain it with English words. Sorry, English is not my language. Sorry for that. But I really hope it's clear enough. It's pretty powerful. So hope you like it and hope you understand it. So this is the wave animation, and the second formula that exists in my drop-down list here in near formula is called end selection, and this is based on for programmers and people who knows expressions. This is based on modulo function. Okay, so the end selection, if I click on it, you will see all your clones affected, and this is due to the fact that by default the n here is on 1 by default. This is on 1 because of the wave animation by default, but the end selection 1 is not enough. What it means is that each one clone each one clone gives this value here in the parameters. But if I choose 2 like the n number, as you can see now, each 2 clones, the parameters will affect only the clones that are even here. So the odd, the even, the odd, the even, odd, the odd, the even, and so on, because of the end selection here. So 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. If I type 3, you will see that there is 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. This is not really easy to understand because of the F. The F is the offset of this selection. So by default, due to the wave animation default state, the end selection is not set up correctly. Sorry. So if I type 0 as a frequency, and if I type 1 here, all the clones will be affected. If I type 2, only the 2, 4, 6, 8, and so on will be affected. If I type 3, only the 3, 6, 9, 12, 15, and so on will be affected. If I type 4, you'll be only you'll animate only the 4, 8, 12, 16, etc., and so on. Same for the 5, so I have selected only the 5, the 5th one, the 10th one, the 15th one, and so on. Okay, so now if I type in 3, for example, I can offset it to, let's say, place this first selection here, which I remind you is based on the transform here. This is the transformation here that I have set up in the transform parameters. Okay, and same for the color. I can choose to colorize them by unchecked the colors from cloner, and as you can see, I have played with the brightness, the color, and so on. I could even go to other, and if I want to, I can modify the glyph by choose another glyph. Let's say, as you can see, this is a reminder. If I open up the add new glyph, if I like, let's say, the let's say this nice triangle here, I like this triangle. Let's roll over this triangle. I can read glyph 89. Okay, so I can type in here 89, and as you can see, there is now a nice triangle. So this is pretty cool, and this is a really nice way to alternate the different clones with other shape or other transformation. Again, you can still play with the fall off option here and have only a portion of your clones affected by this effector formula. Same for the wave animation. okay, and so on. So it's really cool. So this is the end selection. And another cool thing, if you reset it to the default state, all is zeroed out, so you won't see anything, any animation. But if I choose now the latest, oh sorry, I will undo it. Sorry, if I want to place this one on this one and this one after that, I can play with the F, the frequency. So I can go here and type -1, and as you can see, all the clones have been offset by -1. And if I type -2, again it travels towards the previous clone, which is pretty nice. You can animate this to have some nice motion. Okay, and one thing that I really like to do is to read the count in the Moglyph cloner. If I type the same number than the count in the end here, so let's say in my case I can read 40 for this grid. There are 40 clones in my grid, so I can type n 40. And now, which is really cool, is that I can pick up only one clone and affect only the wanted clone to the transformation defined here in the parameters, which is really, really cool. So for example, you could imagine to use this effector formula and create a nice spline cloner with some train wagons, and just choose to change the wagon train to the locomotive for the latest one. So it's difficult to understand like this when I speak, so I will show you that in a few seconds. This is really simple to understand. So so now if I offset with the F, I can, as you can see, choose the exact clone that I want, okay, which is pretty nice. And yeah, this is pretty cool. So this is really a mode that I use a lot. The latest formula that exists is called random direction. So for that I will reset again, so there aren't anything changed for now. I can go in the transform again. I can no, sorry, I will just zero out all the properties. So this is like if I hadn't created any formula effector, so I have reset it. All is at 0. But if I choose now in the formula, the third formula, which is called random direction, and it's based on random function, I click on it. Of course, since any there aren't any parameter here that have been set, so I can go in the transform, and in the random direction I can choose the rotation. But the problem is that you won't see any change because the glyph I used here isn't a good one to demonstrate this. So I will create a new grid from scratch, and this time I will choose a directional glyph, which consists of a bunch of arrows basically, and I will click on grid, and on my grid I will click on, let's say, this nice arrow here. And now that all my glyph can point toward a direction, I can demonstrate the formula effector with this random formula. So I click on my grid, I go in animate tab, click on formula, reset it to 0 it out, okay, and I can go here in the effector, choose the formula, the third one, random direction, Okay, and all I have to do with this particular formula is to go in the parameters, transform, and you have only one single property to change and to set up correctly to make it work. So the goal of this formula is to randomize the direction of your clones. So you want some of your clones to look towards the left, some to look towards the right, and some to look towards the top, and some to look towards the bottom. So this is what it is designed for. And to do so, all you have to do with this random direction, random selected, is to go in the parameters transform and to change the rotation z by 360 degrees, so one full turn. And now, as you can see, it's really cool. All your clones has been randomly turned by 90 degrees. This is really cool for some cases. I used it a few times in some real projects, so hope you like it. If you want to change the overall random look, you just have to play with the n number or the f number. So if I change this value here, I change all the time the randomness. Okay, and same for the n, I can change the randomness here by changing one or the other value. So hope you like it, hope it's clear enough. The formula is pretty powerful and the three are really interesting to use. So yes, I will show you how to create a nice train motion. So I can do something like this, for example. Okay, so I have a nice stroke with a shape layer. With this shape layer selected, so let's do something like this. Okay, I click on my shape layer, I will go in generate, I will choose the Moglyph C spline, click on the spline cloner, I will add a new glyph, sorry, I have to select my Moglyph cloner, I can click on add new glyph, I can choose this cool wagon, this one, this one, this one, and this one, and just whir over the latest glyph, which is called the glyph 50, and it should be the very first head of the train, so it's the locomotive, so it is the 50th glyph, so remind it for after. Okay, I can close it, and now I can go in my object, transform. I want them to be way more, oh, it's a bit too big. Okay, okay, we'll decrease the stroke width for this one. Okay, I can go in the object, play with the end. Okay, perfect. This is pretty cool. I can offset my animation. Okay, and what I want to do is to define the very first glyph here to be the locomotive. So to do that, before that, let's randomize a bit the disposition, because for now it cycles from this one, this one, this one, and we do always the same sequence. So I do not want to iterate, but to randomize them. Okay, cool. So now, if I offset it, okay, I want this first clone to be exactly a locomotive. So to do this, I will click on my cloner, go to animate, formula, I do not want this wave motion by default, so I will reset it. I will go over the effector, formula, and selection. I know that I have exactly 17 clones. I could add more, so I can type, let's say, 18, for example. Okay, 18. And since I know the count here, I can type in the end 18, type 0, and now I'm sure that the latest clone will be the one selected, since I have the count in sync with this one. So if I click on parameters, just to let you know, to show you clearer, I could colorize it. So as you can see, it works. And as you can see, I can now deploy the other group and change the modify glyph by 50, which is the start of the train, the locomotive. Okay, so we click on cloner from colors from cloners, and we are all down. So this is pretty cool. And now all I have to do is to play with the offset, and I have a full train rig that works really well. So I can edit my path, okay, my initial path, and have a simpler path like this, and you will see your clone will update correctly. I can replay with the end like this, and yes, this is pretty cool. Now if I play with the offset, the train travel along the spline. So this is really nice. Okay, cool. This is it for the formula effector. So I hope you understood fully the process and the potential behind it. So let's redo something from scratch for the next one, which is the random effector. So I will regenerate basic geometry. Okay, perfect. And now all I have to do is to select my cloner, go to animate, and click on random. And by default, what the random effector does is to basically randomize the properties of your clones all at the same time. So you can play with the fall off as usual. So you can choose to not affect a specific portion of your clones. So if you want to have only this line, for example, like this, you can do it by defining the correct percentage in the completion from completion to, and you can offset it for your needs. Okay, just like this, which is pretty nice. And I will redo the default. Okay, perfect. So all my clones are now animated. By default, the randomness is animated because of the effector. So again, you'll find a strength. If you type 0, you won't have anything at all. You can have semi values here if you play with this value. Okay, but I will let it to 100. You have a maximum value, a minimum value. So if I do a 0 value, you will find your clones that won't move the same way, and the colors will be affected as well. So I will undo it. So it's important to keep in mind that let's see how your clones are affected. So here is my clone. If I affect it, it can go toward the top and towards the bottom. It can go towards the left and toward the right. This is because of the maximum and the minimum. But if I zero the minimum out, so if I type 0 here, as you can see, it can't go toward the left and it can't go toward the top anymore. This is normal, this is how it works. So the minimum values go towards here and the maximum values to go towards here in terms of position. Okay, and colors are affected as well. So this is important to keep in mind. Okay, and so by default this is negative 100 for the minimum and 100 for the maximum. And this is animated automatically because of the animation speed, which is basically at 2 by default. So if I type in 0, you have now a random that is totally fixed. It's totally still. It remains still during the time. So if you want to have more slow and organic motion, you can have some values like this, for example. And conversely, if you want nervous and really fast motion, you can increase the value of the animation speed like this. Okay, hope it makes sense. It's pretty simple to understand. You can play with the noise scale, which is the pattern of the noise. See, by default it's at 50%, but if you decrease it, you will have a way smaller pattern for having a more independent motion for each clone. And you can do the inverse by increasing this value until the 100%, and at 100% all the clones will be affected at the same time. Okay, so in between values we'll find a nice motion like this. And if you have values like let's say 80, for example, you will see some nice wave, some nice organic motion that will consider a group of clones like a whole thing, which is pretty cool. So smaller values will have a more chaotic randomness for each clone. So this is it for the these properties. If you link dimensions, it will only affect the scale. So if I go over the parameters, by default the random effector affects the position X, the position Y, and it affects the style and the color as well. And if I click on the colors from cloner, as you can see, I don't touch to the color at all, which is pretty interesting too. Okay, if I do not want the multicolor version of these clones, and if I change the color here, the color will change as well. Okay, but for the moment I do not want to play with the color, so I click on colors from cloner, and as a reminder, you can change the Moglyph cloner transform color here. Okay, so this is where you define the color for all your clones. Okay, I can uncheck the colors from clone. I can check the colors from cloner, and I can still play with the field hue, which is nice too, to have a nice range of same color, which is pretty cool. Okay, and you can play with the brightness as well, which is pretty nice too. Okay, perfect. And let's continue with what I said before. So link dimensions only matters for the scale change. So if I play with the scale, I can type, let's say 100 here, and as you can see, some of the glyphs will be whether vertical, where some other will be whether horizontal. So this is by default because the link dimensions is not checked. So I can define a value for the scale X and for the scale Y independently, and the clones won't be scaled the same way. So this is cool. This is really nice. That's okay. So yes, if I zero the position, okay, I have now a nice motion like this. Okay, but now if I link dimensions, and this is why the scale y is in red, there is an expression to it. So if I link dimension, I have now all my clones that randomize their size by keeping the uniform homothency. Okay, this homothetic scale, which is pretty convenient for various cases. Okay, hope it makes sense. It's really clear, I think, so this is pretty cool. Again, keep in mind that you can play with modify or offset glyphs, for example. So you can have really cool effects just by offsetting your glyphs. And what it does basically is to, for each clone, it will cycle through this next clones here for the maximum value, and for the minimum value it will go here, which is nothing here. So it will create some empty clones, which is pretty cool too. So and if I had chosen a clone like this, for example, I can choose let's say this one. Okay, now if I cycle in the 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, okay, I can have an offset glyph of 1, 2, 3, and now I can have some circles that popping up in an organic and random way, which is pretty cool to create some various patterns and effects for FUI or something like this. So this is it for the random effector, pretty simple to understand. So this is cool. I will delete my random effector. I will go here in the glyph. And let's continue. So I will click on my Moglyph cloner, click on the Moglyph animate tab, and the next one is pretty cool too. For this one, I won't choose the grid cloner, sorry. I will recreate a new one from scratch. So I will choose for this purpose the linear cloner. Okay, and I will reset it, and I will go to transform, go to Y center, 100. So now if I rotate my clones, it will rotate around the bottom here. This is why the Y center is set to 100. So perfect, and I will want more clones here, which is pretty cool. I won't change the gap between the per transform clones. I will stay with it, and I will place it a little bit lower here. I will click on the cloner, and I will go in animate and click on the step effector, and as you will see, it's really powerful. So as you can see here, I am at 1 second. I can click on step, and as you can see instantly, if you type U on your keyboard, you will see 2 keyframes. It's really important since the 2 keyframes here define the transition between your first clone and your latest clone. So it's really cool since now these keyframes allows you, just like in Cinema 4D, to benefit to the cube, this is why it's called cube, to the graph editor to reshape your clones with the graph editor. So it's really, really powerful. I'm pretty proud of it. It was pretty complicated to achieve, so it's really nice. So how to use it? So the transformation that is affecting the latest clone is defined again like always, by the parameters here. So if I choose, for instance, style, I uncheck the color, and if I click on red, and if I do not, this is the visibility in the transform here that is affected as well. So if I put 100 in visibility, as you can see then that the very first clone isn't affected at all, while the very last clone is affected at 100%, and all the clones in between are have a nice transition of this value. Okay, so if I type, for instance, let's say yes, scale y of 100, it means that let's do a count of 2 only. As you can see, if I do it, it means that the scale y, if I put 100 here, it will add 100% to have 100% for the first, and if I had 100%, I have now 200% in total for this y scale, which makes sense, I hope. So it's really easy to understand how it works after that. So if I add more glyphs with a count here, it will interpolate the different scales for each clone in between. So it's really cool. You can play with the visibility to have a nice fade out animation or visual effect. So it's pretty cool to make some nice equalizer or something like this. And you can scale them like this on X as well. You can position it. You can position it on Y too. Okay, and as you can see, since I have in the cloner initially I have set up the Y center at 100%, it will scale while keeping the base here like this, okay, at the bottom. So it gives me this nice graph visual. So I can now increase the scale to have something way bigger, and I can create some nice graph with it, some kind of graph, some charts, sorry. And now I can go in the effector, and two only options that are here are the strengths. So again, if I decrease the strength, I can retrieve the value from my initial Moglyph cloner. But if I keep 100 here, I have this curve slider, which is basically where I created the two keyframes. So this is really powerful, because now if I have another, so it's a value from 0 to 1. So if I click here, let's say at this time here in between, I can click here and click, let's say, on 0, and now what it has done, if I go in the graph editor, I can see clearly that the clones reshaped with the step effector follow the exact same curve than in the graph editor. So it's pretty cool, since now I can move the keyframes, the in-between keyframes, to reshape live the clones. So it's really interesting. And you can, moreover, if I delete this in-between keyframe, if I take these two keyframe and if I ease it with keyframe assistant, ease, so now, as you can see, it's really cool. So I can go in the graph editor and I can play with the tangent and with the curve, and now it all reacts to the graph editor. So it's really cool. Let's make some room here. So I can do something like this. I can do the exact invert. Okay, something like this, for instance. Okay, I can add a new keyframe. Okay, something like this. So it's pretty cool. You can really reshape entirely your clones with the graph editor, which is really a nice addition. I'm really again proud of it. So I use it a lot to create nice organic graphics. So this is powerful. You can add as many keyframes as you want to reshape your clones. So it's really nice. I can see a lot of uses for this. So let me show you a nice one. So I will delete it. I can create a nice Bezier path again. Okay, I won't made it visible. I just click on it, click on C-spline, spline cloner, select your Moglyph cloner, add new glyph, and you can let's say click on this one, for example, and you can play with the transform, scale, and add much more glyphs on this one to have a kind of like a spine, kind of a spine, let's say. Okay, so it will react live to my shape layer path, which is really awesome. And if I want a kind of taper effect, I can just go to my Moglyph clone spline and add a nice step effector, and again it will do this by default. And I can go in my cloner, type U on my keyboard, go on my keyboard, select them and ease them, and go in my graph editor, and you can play with the option to have a nice, yes, this kind of thing. So I can have something really big for the base, something like this. Okay, something like this instead, and you can go to the parameters, transform. I do not want the style to be affected, I do not want the visibility to be affected, so I will type 100%, but I want the scale to be way bigger. So now I have this nice taper effect for my curve, so it's really cool. I can still reshape it entirely with the graph editor, which is really nice, and I can still play with the offset of my clones along the path and create so a nice organic motion. Okay, so this is I don't know any other plugin that does this exact same thing, so keep that in mind. It's really cool. Okay, I will decrease the number of clones. I will zero this out. I won't touch to the scale Y, and okay, and 1000. Yes, it's pretty cool. Okay, nice. You can play with the color as well. Okay, and again, it all depends of the graph editor and your keyframes, so it's really convenient. And if I remove the keyframe and if I reset it like this, if I recreate my curve, okay, and if I type 1, okay, there will be some errors that can be ignored because they need the keyframes to work. And sorry, I will recreate a simpler setup for this. I want to continue to demonstrate the step effector, but more simpler. Okay, so let me show you it quickly. So as you can see, it's really fast to set up. Okay, cool. So now again I can click on animate step and parameters. I can crank up the scale Y, and just to finish up with the step, I wanted to show you the fall-off options with the step effector, which is specific to the step effector. If you invert here, you will invert the step effector order as well. So this is the only effector that behaves like this with the invert, because the other effectors are inverted with the completion here only. Okay, so keep that in mind, and you can still of course play with the fall off like always. So yes, this is it for the step effector, really cool. Again, keep in mind that you can still play with fall off options here, randomized and row based, if you want to. So it's really cool. The latest effector from the list is called the time effector. It's really simple, so for this one I will recreate another one from scratch again. So I will create, let's say, a radial cloner, and I will choose a nice iconic outline, add new glyph, and choose this nice let's say a nice where it is basket here. I do not want them to be aligned to the circle, so I can crank it up. I can crank up the count. I can go to transform. Okay, perfect. And I want my glyph to be automatically animated along my path like a carousel. Okay, like I don't know how to call it in English, so sorry for that. But so I will click on my cloner, click on time effector, and as you can see, by default it will do this. Okay, so by default, if you go to the parameters, you'll find the transform, and it will rotate during the time due to the rotation Z. So there is a specificity to the time effector as well. So as you can see in the parameters, all the properties, or most of the properties, have a big T here next to the name of the properties. It means that all these properties will change during the time. So if I move, let's say, the position, if I type 5, sorry for the radial, you won't understand what it does. So if I play with the scale X, scale Y, for example, there is a T. So if I play with 10, the clones will go bigger and bigger and will go until the end of the composition. Okay, it's a hope it makes sense. So since it's a t property, it will change during time, but some of the properties won't change during the time. So for example, the skew, let you skew more or less your glyphs, but it won't change during time. This is not the amount of skew that will change, but you can change during the time the skew angle. So you can change the skew angle, and now you have this nice motion here. Same for the visibility. It's only there because I wanted a nice, an easy way to access the visibility of your clones, but in fact it won't change during time since it's a slider with some limits to 100, so it won't do anything more than 100, so it's not that easy, that useful to animate during time the visibility. So I won't change it during time, so it doesn't have any t next to it, and some of the options in the style can't change during time as well, so that is not animatable. This neither fill hue can be changed during time. This is why the color changed during the time, as you can see. So if I zero it out, as you can see now the color doesn't change anymore. Okay, but if I play with it now, the color will change during the time. Okay, so it works exactly like the time effector from Cinema 4D. So if you already know it from Cinema 4D, you will find it really easy in my tool as well. So that's all for the parameters in time, and in the effector there were only 3 options. The strength, as usual, allows you to colorize or to transform more or less with the effector. I will let it to 100, and you can of course you can animate these strengths to make some simple transition. So let's say if I rotate it during the time, it will do something like this, and in that style I can play with the hue. Okay, so the color change always, which is pretty cool. And if you do not want to do it during all the composition length, you can play with the strength here, and you can keyframe it to 0 to stop the animation. Okay, so you'll have some problems, of course, because of the rotation, which is pretty high at this time, and that has to return to 0 if you have a strength to 0. But in some cases it can be useful with other effectors to animate like this. So that's okay for the strength. Okay, you can have a time multiplier, so you do not have to set up too much properties here. You just have to select a bunch of ones and to tweak some of them quickly, and just not to have to drill down and drill down and drill down and go find all properties each time. You have a simple time multiplier to allow you to that allows you to speed up your animation. So by default 1 corresponds to the time speed, but you can have twice the time speed here to have something twice faster. And if I go 10, for instance, it will be really crazy. Okay, and if I go in the time offset, I can choose to offset the value here. So for now, it starts with this rotation, which is perfectly normally aligned, and it's red, but if I move the time offset, I can, so let's say -1, as you can see, I have offsetted the time by 1 seconds. So if I go at 1 second, okay, I retrieve my red normal basket. Okay, so this is pretty cool to offset your animation during time. It could be useful in some cases. Last thing with this carousel example, if you just want to animate the carousel, all you have to do is to go to the parameters. I want the colors from cloner. I do not want to affect the fill hue. I do not want to rotate them as well. So all I have to do is to play with the position X, because the position X allows your clone to travel along your circle. Okay, so this is it. You can play with the Moglyph cloner and go to Object, Align Clones. No, sorry. So yes, I want to constrain it to keep being vertical. So all I have to do is to play with the rotation as well. -90 degree. Okay, so it's just a matter of value to find. So okay, so something like this. Well, you have the point, you get the point. You can animate the positions on a radial cloner, but be careful if you animate the position X with the time effector on other cloners, it won't behave in the same way. So if I click on the grid, let's say, or no, not to change, I will click on honeycomb for example. I can click on Moglyph cloner, honeycomb, animate, time, and go over the parameters, transform. I do not want to rotate them, I just want to colorize them during time, and I want in the position X to be affected as well. So as you can see, if you play with position X or position Y, your clones will move and travel in a perpetual way. So it can be useful in some cases as well. Okay, so this is it for the time effector. It's pretty easy to understand, one of the simplest, to be honest, with the plane effector. Really, the power comes from the delay effector, the formula, and the step, and the random to add more chaos. I hope you have fully understood all the concepts behind the 6 different effectors and how each one works. If you have some questions, don't hesitate to post them in the comments or to open up some tickets if you have some problems. But normally, if you have fully watched and understood the videos I've shown you, you should be able to use the full potential of the tool without any problem. So this is it. I'm done with the whole overview. Yes, a last thing. I can't show you here because Element is not installed here, but since all the clones are handled by one single text layer, there is one more thing that you could do, which I love to do very much in other versions of After Effects with Element 3D. This is to extrude my text layer with my clones inside Element 3D. You can have some really nice, really cool effects just by extruding and beveling your shapes contained in the text layer. All you have to do, since it's a single text layer, is to reference your text layer in the text and mask layers from custom layers in Element 3D, and to go in the scene setup and to extrude this text layer, and you are good to go. And you can even animate your clones with all the effectors I've shown you, and Element 3D will extrude them in real 3D in almost real time. So this is pretty powerful. I can't show you here, so sorry for that, but don't hesitate to watch the examples in the trailer to try to reproduce them, and don't hesitate to mix, to try the different Moglyph fonts. Just to end up with the tutorial, I wanted to let you know that I'm currently working on more Moglyph fonts, so you can expect in a few months a few new Moglyph fonts, which is pretty cool because you won't pay for that. It will be a continuously updated list of fonts, so you will have more than 1,000 different glyphs, which is pretty nice. So don't hesitate to test them all and to try the different clonal setups, and don't hesitate to post your work with it. So that's all. I'm done with it. So I'm really glad you discovered this pretty nice Moglyph FX tool. I hope you will have as much fun as I had to create this, because it's really cool to do it. So I have really great hopes for it. And well, this is it. Sorry for the length of the video, sorry for all my English mistakes. Have fun with the tools, and well, goodbye guys, see you later.